Hello everybody, these are extremely interesting visuals. Indian Prime Minister and Ukrainian President meeting face to face for the very first time since Russia-Ukraine conflict has started in early 2022. And this setup right now is on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Hiroshima. In this video, we are going to talk about number 1, what is G7 all about? Number 2, why are these guys who are not even part of original G7 setup, both the Indian Prime Minister and the Ukrainian President, what are they doing in Hiroshima? And finally, what are the topics that are being discussed in this year's G7 and would it really lead to something meaningful? Before we continue, quick request, please go ahead, press on that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, gives me a lot of motivation. Let's get started with the first point. What is G7 all about? Well, this is an informal association. It has 7 different countries in it: United States, Canada, UK, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. At a certain point in time, between 1998 to 2014, even Russia was part of the G7 setup and it was called as G8. Well, the G7 is a group which comes together and talks primarily about different economic activities around the world and how they can resolve a lot of these issues. However, if you think about it, why was Russia removed? It's a major economic powerhouse in the entire world. Because Russia invaded Crimea region, which was supposed to be a part of Ukraine. That was the primary trigger for Russia to be out of the G7 setup. And now, if you think about the topics of discussion for this specific G7 summit itself, it is of course Russia-Ukraine conflict and the Chinese sanctions on different countries. Let's take a step back and understand now what are these two guys, Indian Prime Minister and Ukrainian President, doing in Hiroshima. To start up with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the sanctions imposed by the American government were not too impactful. A lot of questions around how did the sanctions actually benefit Russia to start up with? One, because the world moved on and realized that dollar is not any more reliable. US can impose sanctions on any of these countries at its own will. So let's create a new currency. Well, we know G7 are economic powerhouses, but the commodities are in the other parts of the world, whether it is BRICS, whether it is G20, or whether it is SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, if you have commodities in these different countries and these different bilateral, unilateral organizations, then they can create their own currency, and that's the whole point. And this entire concept got into limelight because of the US sanctions on Russia. So the Russian sanctions were not effective to start with. And the second point is also Russia found new trading partners for oil in terms of China, India, and Saudi Arabia. So having Ukrainian president in this G7 summit is very important from an optical perspective. This entire limelight is now on Ukrainian president. It's a stage for him to voice over his concern, share what's happening in his country so that nobody is asking questions about what is the impact of the sanctions in the last 1 year. Then what is the role of Mr. Narendra Modi? Narendra Modi clearly over the last 15 months has been a neutral individual. The entire Indian stance on Russia-Ukraine war has also been neutral. They never condemned Russia. However, they always repeated that only dialogue and diplomacy can resolve this situation. And the PMO office, even after the meeting with the Ukrainian president, came up with the exact same thing, that hey, diplomacy and dialogue are the only ways in which this conflict can be resolved. Now, if India is neutral and shaking hands with Russia, is present in G7, forget about the invite. If they accept the invite and if they are present in Hiroshima and being on the same stage as the other G7 leaders who are against Russia, it sends a very strong signal to Russia itself. So both these guys being present in Hiroshima is a lot to do with optics more than anything else. And it's a big win for the US. But why did the Ukrainian president accept the invite? Because less than 24 hours before this entire summit, the presence of Ukrainian president was still not confirmed. What made him agree to come at that last minute? Because US has agreed for the Ukrainian pilots to be trained on their F-16 jets. 3 months back on Feb 24th, US President Joe Biden has mentioned that they are not going to give F-16 jets to Ukraine.
You don't think he needs F-16s now?
No, he doesn't need F-16s now.
And within 3 months, there's a sharp U-turn.
Today, a senior administration official tells ABC News that President Biden has informed the G7 allies here that the United States has agreed to allow Ukrainian pilots to begin training to fly American-made F-16 fighter jets.
What changed on the battleground that led to this kind of change of heart? It has a lot to do with, again, pulling Ukrainian president into Hiroshima. Now, these F-16 jets, if they are fighting for Ukrainian army, it means a lot, and Russia is not going to take it easily. And that's the reason why the US president did not allow and did not want to escalate unpredictable behavior from the Russian side. However, this time he wanted to use that so that he can show the Ukrainian president as the limelight and the hero of this entire G7 summit. Now, moving on, what is the second point of discussion in this particular summit? It's clearly the economic sanctions imposed by China, not the economic sanctions imposed on China or the sanctions imposed by US on Russia. Well, we always talk about the sanctions imposed by US, but in this discussion, it's about the Chinese sanctions. Well, to start off with, again, China has 130 plus trade partners where it is their primary trade partner, leading US. And it has a lot of leverage with all these 130 plus countries because they import into China. China is a huge market. For example, one of the sanctions it imposed was on Lithuania because Lithuania has allowed Taiwan to open their embassy in the capital city of Lithuania. And what did China do? China mentioned that there are some custom documents missing and hence they stopped imports of beef, beer, dairy products and a few other products from Lithuania into China. To start up with, Lithuanian products going into China are very few and far in between. Only 1 to 2% of the Lithuanian exports go into China. So it was not a big problem. So what did the China government do? They looked into the companies which have plants established in Lithuania and started to impose sanctions on them so that they change their behavior and pull out their plants from Lithuania, and again indirectly affecting the behavior of the Lithuanian government itself. So you can see the kind of sanctions that Chinese government would go to any extreme to impose on different trading partners. This is just one example. If I have to talk about a different example altogether, it could be the Chinese sanctions on the South Korean tourism. The Chinese government mentioned that they won't allow group travelers to be going into South Korea. And South Korea, in their entire tourism industry, more than 50% of the tourists come from China. And it was a loss for them in the tune of $15.6 billion. So you can understand that while these might be small sanctions, they are still significant for the economies involved. And China has been on a roll increasing these number of sanctions. Just look at this graph. You will notice that the number of sanctions have increased from 2013 to 2018, and from 2018 now to 2023, it is expected to go up once again. Now, the entire discussion in the G7 summit is that, hey, of course, all these 7 world leaders will come onto the same stage and mention that we do condemn these sanctions by China. But can they do anything in reality? That's a question mark, because for all these countries as well, China is one of their leading trade partners. If China imposes another ban on their goods, their economies will suffer. Of course, from a symbolic perspective and an optics perspective, this meeting has a lot of significance and it conveys a lot of strength. But in reality, can they do anything? That's a question mark. And we will know about it only after we see the results being implemented on the ground. Thank you so much, guys, and we'll see you again in the next video. If you haven't liked the video yet, please go ahead, click on that like button and subscribe to the channel. Take care. Bye-bye.